I'm Dr. Duke with The New American, and I'm joined today by Mike Hill, a representative from the state of Florida, District 1, I believe. Thanks for joining us today, Representative Hill.
Dr. Pesta, thank you for having me.
Well, Mike, I'm really excited about this conversation because there's a lot of people talking, and everyone's telling people like me, based on perhaps my skin color, and you, perhaps based on your political affiliation, that we really don't have anything to add to the conversation. So we're going to have that conversation today, and that conversation I'd like to be, let's talk first about what are the legitimate and sincere aspects of Black Lives Matter, the movement, that I think Americans of good faith in all different political and cultural backgrounds can agree to. And then I want to get into where this spun horribly off the rails into something anarchic and manipulated by big international donors and violent, how that happened. So start with this. In your estimation, what is the sincere core of the Black Lives Matter movement, and that part of the movement that to you think is really important and necessary to get out to people?
I think the core of the Black Lives Matter movement is how they perceive they're being treated by our police force. They believe that they are targeted by the police force, that they are treated more roughly, more unfairly by the police force. And even going beyond that, if you look at statistics, when they are sentenced, their sentencing seems to be longer than those who are white for very similar crimes. So I think those are all legitimate concerns that they have, and that's what needs to be addressed. It is, are you being targeted because of your skin color? Is there racial profiling? And then once you are stopped, are you being treated differently or more harshly than others?
Well, let me ask you about that, just to play devil's advocate here. We have a lot of statistics from the FBI, all sorts of crime gathering, things, seemingly politically neutral organizations that tell us, well, is it really true that violence by white cops against black unarmed suspects is growing? Is that a true statement? It looks bad. I agree with you. I think you're absolutely right that every Photoshop that we see, every photo event of this kind of violence we see demonstrates that it's unacceptable no matter when it happens. But are the numbers, when you look at them from a calculatedly statistical perspective, would you argue they are really skewed?
No, they are not. And in fact, the numbers show us something differently, that there is per capita more arrests that are made with white criminals than there are black criminals by police. What we are seeing instead is that the black on black crime is skewed way off the charts. That's where we're seeing the danger. But per capita, no, blacks are not targeted more by white policemen than whites are. And in fact, statistics show that whites have been killed by white policemen at a higher rate than blacks have been killed by white policemen.
Yeah, those are the numbers, and they're undisputable. I would ask you this. So why is it, two things. One, why is it that that is not taken into the equation here? I realize that emotions run high in this era of 24/7 video. An image means way more than dry statistics. But why is that not only not taken into account, but if it's actually suggested, huge portions of what we would today call the Black Lives Matter populace would turn around and call you racist for even suggesting it? Why is this not something that can be discussed?
I think perception is everything. And so when we see that there is a lot of crime happening in the black community, that can't be disputed. And when the police show up there because of the frequency of those crimes, it gives the perception that they are being targeted in the black community. So I can see them having that perception. But what they don't see is the numbers in a broader context, which shows that no, you are not being targeted. It is simply a fact that more crimes are committed in a black neighborhood than we see in a white neighborhood. And so the perception is that you're being targeted, when in fact law enforcement is doing their job.
Now, I work in a university, and I'm sure you understand that the universities are full of really pasty white people who are bending over and twisting mathematics and sociology every conceivable way to mask what you just said. What would you say to my academic colleagues who would say something like this? Well, everything you said may be statistically true, but the reason black on black violence is high is because of white racism. What would you say to that? Because that's the argument I always hear.
That's nonsense. And that is nothing more than a red herring. You throw that out because how do you argue against, well, it's not racism. I mean, that's the only thing you can say is that there is no racism. Well, how do you prove that? Well, you have to look at the numbers. So for them to just throw that out, that it's all based on racism, is not true. It is law enforcement doing their job. That is what we as a society expect them to do, to not only keep those in a white neighborhood safe, but to keep those in a black neighborhood safe also. That we can't let anarchy reign in the black communities because every time a white police officer goes in there, it's called racism. No, they deserve protection just like those in the white community.
Well, one of the things I've learned from this recent spate of events is that, by all means, educating police officers better in how to arrest people, in the mechanics of arrests, in how to detain and restrain people. I think the more of that you can have, the more of a conversation you can have about that, the better. But that requires actually giving more funds and taking more care to make sure that our police officers are equipped with what they need. How is it possible that radical progressives and the poor young people they have hoodwinked, how is it possible that radical progressives and their followers actually think defunding the police is going to make anybody safer?
Because they're deceived. In fact, President Trump came out just today with his announcement to give more funding to police departments if they agree to adhere to certain standards of how police are trained, how they are to react in certain situations. Defunding the situation is the exact opposite direction in which you want to go. And we have proof of that, evidence of it. If you look at Seattle right now, in the city of Seattle, they have cordoned off blocks of the city and aren't allowing the police force to go in, and we're seeing that they have crime being committed. Crimes are being committed within that cordoned off block because there is no protection. We need protection very simply because of human nature. That there are bad people and there are good people, and there are very bad people. And the police force is there to protect us from the bad people and the very bad people. Defunding them is not going to do anything but make the situation worse.
Well, Mike, I mean, it's not just that they've got lawlessness in this. I call it the new utopian ashram of Seattle, right? They've commandeered 6 city blocks. They've turned the police precinct into some kind of a hippie love ashram, a reconstruction of something from Haight-Ashbury in the 60s. But it's not just that they're struggling with law and order. They built a wall. They've built walls to keep people out and keep people in. They're using hated guns to enforce their worldview. Everything they said they were fighting, all the things they said in our new racially pure, racially equal utopia, none of these things will be. They're looking like much bigger fascists than any other aspect of American culture has been in a long time. It seems that's on display here. Is it possible in the minute and a half we have left, Mike, is it possible at this point to separate Black Lives Matter from the anarchy and the chaos and the violence and the ubiquitous link to Antifa? When you see one, you see the other. And if it's possible, how do you do it?
I don't think it's possible, Dr. Pesta. That they have joined themselves at the hip with Antifa and other radical leftist organizations. Why? Because that's how they get their funding. We know their funding is coming from organizations that are funded by George Soros. The same organizations that fund Antifa are funding Black Lives Matter. So I don't think there is a way of right now resolving what they have gotten themselves into. There has to be a new and different kind of movement, much like Dr. Martin Luther King put together in the 60s. Well,
a number of African-American senators have proposed something called the All Black Lives Matter movement to replace Black Lives Matter, which would take into account black-on-black violence, the black victims of black crime, aborted unborn black babies and justice for them. That strikes me as interesting. However, we both know that's going to go nowhere in the highly charged political culture that we're experiencing today in this country and around the world. We'll come back after the break and continue this.